evening, good evening, good evening, good evening, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. WeatherBrains episode 928, Halloween Eve, October 30th, 2023. It's the Monday night weather party. This is the pre-show, the magical part of this program, where we do three things. We share boring personal stories, humorous anecdotes, and from time to time we say really outrageous things. All right, so welcome. And a good shoe tonight. Man, I've had a frustrating weekend. I mean, it's a good weekend, but so these, to do live shots on television, you really don't use microwaves anymore. You use a technology called Live View, or most TV groups use that, and we do. And so these guys decided just not to support the Mac operating system, the newer one, 14. And they're up to the .1. And typically, I do not upgrade production machines. I don't do it until the .1s come out, which is typically a couple of months after the initial release to get all the bugs out. And so I had to roll back this computer from Sonoma to Ventura. And these things are not really designed to roll back easily. You have to get into the terminal, and I can say it's aggravating. But you know what? You back up the backup, the backup. I got plenty of backup, so we're good. And we're on the air. We are here, and we've got this thing rolling. But that is just so strange because most creatives use Macintosh, the Apple, type hardware and software. And for these guys not to support that's just so odd. I cannot understand that. And I sent them a note, and they sent a note back. You must remain on old operating system. I'm sorry, Brian, I'm griping. How are you?
I'm doing just fine. How are you doing, James?
Just, yeah, it's all good. My only problem is a computer problem. I got no problems. I am just happy. I am very blessed. But rolling back a Mac to a previous older operating system version is not the easiest thing to do. You have to get in the terminal and do some Unix voodoo and some other things, and that's okay. I mean, I like a challenge. I kind of like piddling with this stuff, but after a while, it just we all have 24 hours in a day, and how you spend it determines who you are. So sometimes you have to. But Saturday was a great day. Other than piddling with this computer all day, I didn't do anything. It was great. So. Bill, are you okay?
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Do I sound okay?
Loud and clear.
Hello, Brian.
Hello, Bill.
Where's Jeremy? As if on cue.
Bill is broadcasting live from a 88D facility near you. Which one is that?
Do we know? Brian is?
Yeah, Brian, not Bill.
Well, that's the Omaha, OAX, the Omaha Valley office.
Okay. It's a good looking shot.
Mm-hmm.
I need to come up with a better background. So everybody's like, Bill's got his The World Tonight with Bill Murray with his global map there. And I've got,
well, yours is real.
I got Kiss albums here. I've got, I'm probably the only guy with Kiss vinyl albums back here.
Yours, it looks all official with the TV station logo and everything.
It used to look nice.
Gives us a little credibility.
It's got kind of junky in the little closet here. I need to clean it up. But then again, maybe I won't. It's just like I was talking about. Everybody has to prioritize.
Don't do anything rash.
Yeah.
Well, it reminds me of some of the old TV news sets from back a long time ago. You'd have the world in the background.
Yes, the World News Tonight with Bill Murray, live from Tokyo, London, and our bureau in New York City. I'm sorry, I'm unhinged. Jen, I'm sorry.
You must have had some of the Halloween candy a little early.
No, I cannot confess. You're right.
Oh man, that was good.
We got a great question about you tonight in the mailbag too. We'll have to all give our best answer for.
Yes, that made me chuckle. So I'm looking forward to reading that question.
I asked ChatGPT what it thought who should play that role, and it'll be interesting what the answer is.
Interesting.
I had a better answer than ChatGPT, so I was happy.
That's great.
Good evening, everyone.
Hey, Jeremy.
Hi, Jeremy. Good to see you.
Good to see everyone. Brian, good to see you. Congrats.
Well, thank you. Yeah, 35 years and 4 months. That's a long time.
Well, come on now. You're just getting started. Let's go. I mean, like, come on
That's
now.
true.
I guarantee you I'm a lot older than you, and I'm at it,
Oh,
and
yeah.
I'm just getting started. I will drop dead on the green wall or somewhere doing the weather thing. I just can't quit. I don't know how to quit. Maybe you can teach me on this show how to quit.
Well, I quit from the Weather Service, so
Right. I
that's
mean,
great.
nobody quits, but I'm talking about retiring from your primary job.
Right.
I don't know.
I was shocked that my buddy Tom Skilling is retiring in February.
Oh, no. I reached out to him to invite him to a show. Brian may need you to make sure he got that email.
Yeah,
he probably he's been on the show a few times before. He probably knows better. He just deleted the email and ran.
Probably.
Yeah.
He was so super nice both times he was on here. They're just
he is the
super
most
shows.
humble man I know.
Yeah.
Humility is a good thing. It's missing in the. I've said it a gazillion times. The one thing missing in the weather enterprise, it's humility. We think we know it all, and the truth is we really don't. And sometimes people get arrogant, and I'll just leave it at that. But as I get older, I know how much we don't know. I'll put it that way. There is so many mysteries to solve in this puzzle.
James, if you're ever going to know one thing about me, I'm a man of gratitude and humility.
Ooh, show title. Man of gratitude and humility. But we can't use the show title because we're not on the air yet. We have to wait until the show starts at 7.
I could sneak that in during the show.
Yeah. I'm a man of what?
Go ahead, James.
No, where is James A? He's at
home.
He's in a different studio here.
Yeah, I'm at home.
The disturbing thing is, why would you wear a tie at home?
You don't hang out in a tie at home.
It's like Leave It to Beaver. They'd all come in there with ties and suits and wear it around the house. No, I'm in
evening
cargo shorts and a t-shirt.
No, we're actually we've got our baseball, so we did not have a 6 to 7 o'clock newscast, and we don't have a 9 to 10. So it's like the olden days. I'm off at 6 and don't have to be back until the 10 o'clock show. So I had a chance to come home and, enjoy kind of throwback Monday night.
I like it. And let's welcome our television viewers. We are live on the television side. We're at the top of the hour, and let's get this show started by hitting the record button on track 1 and track 2. And here we go in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. WeatherBrains, the weekly show all about weather. This is episode number 928. This is for the 30th of October, 2023. It's Halloween Eve. Jen, are you now? Do you greet the little ones that are trick-or-treating at your door and hand out candy, or do you turn your lights off and say, "Hey, you kids, get off of my lawn"?
Get off my lawn. No, I'm actually that way, but for a good reason, to get off my lawn, because I'm not home. It's my mom's birthday on Halloween. Ooh. So I take her out. So we'll be going out for dinner tomorrow, or usually either that or we go to the folks' house and eat and what have you. So yeah, it's my mom's birthday. So I'm usually not here, but and I wouldn't want to be tomorrow. We're actually going to get, I think, our first snow of the season up here tomorrow. Ooh. with that little clipper coming through. So it could be a little slick in the evening and overnight. And we're freezing tonight. That's our coldest air of the season so far coming in.
Yeah, I think for most people on the show here, we've experienced a major air mass change. Rick Smith, I think you've had a major air mass change, have you not?
Major air mass change could be a good show title too. Yeah, I mean, it's cold. It's definitely had a strong cold front come through, coldest air of the season. That seems to be that could be another show title. Yeah, had our first freeze, and we're going to get down in the mid-20s by tomorrow morning and Wednesday morning. But I don't know. We'll have a little bit more fall to go. But yeah, it's chilly.
All right. And for those that are watching, we have James Adelot, who is home this evening because of the World Series on Fox. Cool.
Absolutely. Yeah, we'll have a little frost on the pumpkin tonight. Last night we were 30 in Tulsa. We'll probably be a degree or two cooler than that, but with light wind. So the sound of windshield scraping will be the theme of Tulsa tomorrow morning.
Awesome. Well, I see Troy Kimmel, who just joined us from deep in the heart of Texas. Troy, have you been the recipient of this cold air? I think you have, huh?
I thought you'd ask if I was the grouch at the front door tomorrow night. I figured you'd ask me that first.
Hey, you kids, get off our lawn.
Yeah, off the lawn. No, we'll do something tomorrow night. I just hadn't decided what. It'll be tomorrow sometime during the day. It's going to be one of the things that gets done tomorrow. We've had the big air mass change here. We're sitting at 46 right now on the good old MMTS, the co-op station here where I am. And we had got another half inch today. And so for this location at Northwest Austin, we're up to 580 on the rainfall for the month now. And that is the heaviest rain we've seen in months around here. So it's all changed, and we're back to the 70s and 80s by the weekend, early next week. But it looks like real nice weather, sunshine beginning tomorrow, and at least some sunshine all the way into early next week. So I don't see any big changes after a little rain and cooler weather. I'll take it.
Yep. Dr. Cloco McLean is here from Oklahoma, Rick's neighbor. Kim, how are you?
I'm doing great, and I want to let you guys know I get to be in a very random little feature on Fox Weather in like about 40 minutes or so. So I'll be here for the start of the show, and then I'm going to go over there, and then I'm going to come back for like the last hour. So I'm doing
something be on the hail capital of the country or the world or what?
No, actually, okay. It's so funny. I am going to be talking about why it is that we see in fatality statistics for weather phenomena across the board that men are disproportionately likely to die in weather events.
That's a whole nother show, James.
Yeah, well, men are inherently stupid. Yeah. I mean, that's easy.
No, totally.
There's your title right there.
Idiots. I will pretty much say that with a lot more words.
No big surprise there. Kim is always good at the grace. So,
y'all do it over Zoom or something? Kim, just bring us with you. We'll all
they
go.
Have some application I've never used before. She said it was Zoom-like.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so, but then Kim's a power player. Well, I got to break away and do some national television here for a few minutes, and I'll get back to you.
I'll get back to you guys a little later. The cable channel,
no, power broker. So I'll try and put them up on one of these monitors in here so I can keep an eye on you. But I know, as always, you will do a marvelous job. You're an incredible communicator. But let's go to Bill Murray to bring in our guest. Bill, I'm excited about this show.
Yeah, me too, James. Tonight's guest, WeatherBrain, is the idea friend of the podcast, Jeremy Bowers. Jeremy has appeared on several shows in the past as accomplished photographer. In fact, he won second place in the 2022 AMS Weatherband Photo Contest. He owns JRB Storm Photography, and he's employed by the Nebraska Department of Natural Resources, where he makes sure that all those wells that people have are drilled in compliance with state law. He maintains the records and does all that. Jeremy, welcome back to the show. How have you been?
Doing well, Bill, and thanks for the excellent opening. I think I'm just going to need to hire you to do all the for all the events that Chantel and I do. We're just going to pay to do that. We'll talk later offline about that. But no, in all seriousness, doing well. It's kind of a interesting feeling, sitting here just a few months shy of 43 and just thinking I'm hitting my stride in life, which is great. It's awesome. I think it's not a matter of when you get there, as long as you get there.
That's exactly right. It's the journey to get to the destination.
Jeremy, how do you define stride? Never mind.
Yeah.
Just wondering.
And that's an interesting segue. I don't want to take too much time because we want to get to Brian and everything, but every once in a while we do all these outreach events, and we have, high schoolers and, kids in college, and you're just like, what's your advice? Like, what do you have advice? And I always say, live for the moment, not the social media post. Just take the life in stride.
Yep.
Take each moment, enjoy it, make the most of every opportunity that comes along. And sometimes along the way, maybe you got to create your own. And maybe you get a little taste of that success somewhere along the line.
Sounds good to me.
Well, we're glad you're with us tonight, and thank you for the great suggestion, Jeremy, for sure. I usually read a couple of lines of bio here, but I chose to read the email that Jeremy wrote suggesting tonight's guest weather brain instead. He opened it up by saying Oxford defines respect as a feeling of deep admiration for someone or something elicited by their abilities, qualities, or achievements. And he says that's a perfect description of Brian Smith, the warning coordination meteorologist at the National Weather Service Forecast Office in Omaha since 1988. Yeah, he's been Jeremy's mentor, supporter, and friend to he and his wife since they met back in the mid-2000s. Jeremy said they crossed paths at the Lincoln Air Show in August and learned that Brian was retiring at the end of September and couldn't think of a more deserving individual to share stories from his career, especially some of those stories about working with Dr. Ted Fujita when he was a grad student at the University of Chicago. And Jeremy said he would highly recommend reaching out to Brian, and we did that, and we're so excited that he could join us. Brian Smith, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Bill. It's great to be on the show. And I wasn't the warning coordination meteorologist since 1988, but since 94. Before that, I was at the Severe Storms Forecast Center, putting out convective outlooks. So.
Well, that just gives us more to talk about. So that's kind of perfect. Tell us, Brian, how you and Jeremy got to know each other.
Well, it's probably had to do with the Weather Fest that was an annual event down in Lincoln, and he and Chantal would be there with a booth with photography, and I think Jeremy actually had a photography clinic too that he would give at the Weather Fest. So it was during that period that we met.
Talk about the WeatherFest for a minute, because we've discussed that on the show before. It seems like a really, really big event. Is it still going on? Did it survive the pandemic and make it to the other side? Is it still a thing?
No, it stopped. The one person who was the drive for that was Dr. Ken Dewey,
right,
from University of Nebraska in Lincoln, and he headed that up, and so I think, I don't know, due to health reasons, and also that was part of it. Jeremy might know more about it, but he decided not to continue the event, so no more WeatherFest. He kind of modeled this the WeatherFest after an event we had in Chicago that I helped start, which was the Fermilab tornado seminar that Tom Skilling and I started way back in 1981. So
Kim has lighted up at that comment. Kim, any memories of the Fermilab events?
Oh yeah,
in your formative years.
Yeah, I grew up just down the road from that facility, but I didn't actually get to go to that workshop until I was at Purdue for undergrad. So that was the first weather conference I ever attended, was that workshop that you put together with Tom Skilling. And it was so good. It was so good. So I thank you for everything you did. There are a lot of us up in the upper Midwest who got access to a lot of really great science and speakers. It's a high profile conference. So it was just really, really wonderful.
Yeah, so Brian, talk about how that came into be and some of the fascinating stories over the year, because I know Tom has shared several, and when we've had him on before, but I'm sure you've got several that you could add to that.
Well, I was a grad student at the University of Chicago under Ted Fujita at the time, and I was also involved in emergency management in my hometown, which is Geneva, Illinois, and so that's where I grew up. And so I was involved with their emergency management agency as their weather officer. And I thought to myself, wouldn't it be neat if we could get somebody out here like in television weather to help host a program for the general public on severe weather safety. Now, Tom wasn't the first person I picked. It was actually, I knew Harry Volkman quite well in Chicago, and so I was one of his observers. So I called him up, and I said, I'd like to do this program, and we have a venue for it, and it actually was in the high school auditorium in Geneva, Illinois, for the first one. And he said, well, he'd be willing to do it. And so we were all set for Harry to go ahead and do it, but he backed out, like within, I'd say a month and a half before the event. There was a conflict or something. And so then I'm scrambling to figure out, who do we get now? And so I met Tom, in the late 70s, like 79. He had been at WGN about a year. I met him at the Severe Storm Conference, which was in Kansas City. And we got to know each other real well. So I thought, well, let's get Tom Skilling. And so it was just me and Tom on stage. We had 40 people in the audience. And we kind of tag team back and forth. And it was real fun. We had severe weather safety, some storm spotter stuff that we showed. So the next year, the emergency manager at Fermilab said, "Hey, we got a bigger auditorium. We can hold it here." So the next year we held it at Fermilab, and the rest was history. It kept growing and growing. We had a lot of good support from their visual media services department there. And we had a lot of great guests that came over the years for that program. And it was for the general public. So we would see families there with people, with kids, and you'd see grandparents, and you would see budding meteorologists. You'd see people from Purdue, from Northern Illinois University, from Valpo that would come there to visit, to see the program.
So Brian, you mentioned Harry Volkman. Let's talk about him for a moment, because he's famous. James A., jump in and talk about your tidbit there.
Yeah, he was the first meteorologist at KOTV here in Tulsa, and then moved to Oklahoma City, where he was at WKY, which is now K4. And if I'm not mistaken, he is the originator of broadcasting tornado warnings, because his general manager said, yeah, you go ahead and do it, when he was listening to tornado forecasts on the radio from Air Force meteorologist stationed at Tinker Air Force Base. And he said, do it. And he went on the air and did it. And apparently the FCC got all irritated about it, and has, as I put in chat, has been continually irritated about everything ever since.
So that's what did it.
True.
So did you know Harry pretty well, Brian?
Yeah, I did. When I was a undergrad student at Northern Illinois University, got to know him, and actually was one of his observers, and I'd occasionally go to WGM to see him. And we'd talk on the telephone and so forth a little bit once in a while, but I got to know him pretty well. And, he moved around a lot. He was originally on the NBC affiliate in Chicago, WMAQ TV, and then he moved over to WGN, and then he went from WGN back to WMAQ, and then he went back to WGN again, and finally he went to WVBM TV in Chicago there. So he moved around quite a bit, but and actually Tom Skilling was Harry Volkmann's replacement at WGN in 1978. So what's interesting, here's an interesting tidbit. When I got married, Harry lived in Glenview, Illinois, and my wife is from Glenview, Illinois. And he lived down the street from my wife. When I was on the day of my wedding day, I was at the church, and he went to my wife's parents' house and was looking for me because he wanted to congratulate me getting married. So I thought that was kind of fun. She was just a neighbor of his.
That's pretty cool. Now, I noticed from your bio you graduated in 1980, but you had already been working as a weather officer for 6 years before that. How did that come to be?
Well, I was in high school, and I would see, like at high school basketball games, and I'd see some people in uniforms that weren't police officers, but they were in emergency management, or at that time, civil defense, it was called. And I thought that was kind of interesting. And one of the people that was in high school. And so I asked about it and got involved with it. And so I helped out as a weather officer for Geneva. It was Emergency Services and Disaster Agency, or ESDA, as it was called back then. And for many years there, from the mid 70s to the 80s. So, and they wanted somebody that knew anything about tornadoes and severe weather. And I was, I got interested in tornadoes and severe weather ever since I was when I was in grade school. And there's another story with that too, I can tell. But anyway, so I helped train and did storm spotter training for them back in the mid 70s. And at that time, there wasn't many films or slides out there to use. You had the Weather Service or film called Tornado. That was kind of a public safety video or film, movie film. And there was another one called Day of the Killer Tornadoes. That was on April 3rd outbreak. Speaking of April 3rd, the first tornado watch that I ever worked for emergency management that I got called out of high school class for was on April 3rd, 1974. So that was kind of interesting to do that. Not too many kids get pulled out of high school now to do something like that, but that's the way it was. So
Brian, if you've mentioned that there was an event in grade school that piqued your interest, an event in the area, and you were in high school in the 70s, does that mean that it was the Belvedere tornado that got you into meteorology, or something else?
Yeah, it was actually two events that took place. In my hometown of Geneva was hit twice. And in Palm Sunday, 1965. The Crystal Lake tornado was the big tornado that occurred that day in Illinois. Of course, there's many other big tornadoes, but a little one hit my hometown on the west side. And I remember my dad and mom driving by the damage and so forth. And I was kind of fascinated with that. And then, 2 years later, April 21st, 1967, hit. And that was the time when Oak Lawn got hit, Oak Lawn, Illinois, Belvedere, Lake Zurich, Illinois, all three big tornadoes. Well, another tornado, which was an F2 tornado, went just east of where I lived. And in fact, I figured out where the track of the whole tornado, and I figured I was within about 1,000 feet from the tornado, but I didn't know it because my mom rushed me down to the basement during that time. But that got me fascinated with tornadoes. And then I started reading things about a person named Fujita in the newspaper and so forth, and got interested and would go to the library and check out books on severe weather and weather in general. At that time there wasn't that much to choose from, but I would check out a book, bring it back, and check it out again, over and over. So I got fascinated with that and started taking weather observations. And even in the 5th grade, I was reading the weather forecast on the intercom before the school started or classes started. So I caught the weather bug early, and it was due to those tornado events.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And so, 1974, that obviously a huge event, but talk about Palm Sunday for a second. A little bit more in the larger scheme of things, because a lot of stuff came out of that, Brian.
Well, a lot of things came out of that, that was really Ted Fujita's first real aerial damage surveys were done on that event. Both of those events prompted things. I think the start of NOAA Weather Radio goes back to that time period too. Its infancy back then, trying to get people to be alerted that when these things happen. So, but yeah, that was Palm Sunday was certainly a significant event. Of course, I was only 8 years old at that time, so it was my memory of that is not the greatest, but but I do remember seeing the damage.
And so you mentioned Dr. Fujita, who, of course, his birthday was 1 week ago tonight. And so, he holds a very, very special place in meteorology. Talk about getting to meet him the first time. What was it like?
Well, gee, I met him probably a couple of years earlier. We went down to the university to see a lecture of his, which he had given about the Bossier City, Louisiana tornado. And so I got to meet him. You're kind of in awe of this person at first when you meet him. But he was very personable at the time, and I certainly wanted to study under him. I had this interest in tornadoes and severe weather, and thought what he was doing was fascinating. And so I made it a goal of mine to go to grad school there if I could. And there's a lot of stories I could tell you about Ted over the years being there at Chicago. He was a very driven person. He was a workaholic. He would come there at like 8 a.m, stay there till about 6 p.m, would leave, go home and eat, then come back and go back to work and stay working till about 10:30 at night. So, and he was, he demanded perfection, especially when you were doing graphics and things like that. He wanted things to be perfect. And so you got to know the Fujita style of doing different maps and so forth, what size you use for lettering and how your borders looked and all that sort of stuff to make it pop. So he really pioneered graphics. That his idea was that he told me, he said that if you draw a graphic and somebody, you give it to somebody and it takes them more than a couple minutes to figure it out, it's not worth anything. So you have to make it really understandable.
Of course, his graphic of the 1974 outbreak is just a spectacular work of art. And one I see frequently, even today in Jen's introduction of her Tornado Talk special about the super outbreak, she had that image and you just immediately know it, along with anything else that he ever did. It just stands out. It's so distinctive.
Well, how many people have that color map somewhere? I have it physically somewhere over here. It's in a file, so
it's one of my treasured gifts that I got an actual copy of it. It's just crazy.
I've got several of them. But what's interesting about that, he sent several teams out to do the aerial damage survey of the event. And then when they all came back, he wanted to make sure everything was accurate. So he went and rented a Cessna plane, and he went over every track, all 148 tornadoes, to make sure that they were all done correctly, which is mind-boggling how much time you'd have to spend in the air doing that, but he did that.
Well, someone asked me that just this week, Brian. Did he fly every path? And I said, there's no way he could have done that. So you say I was wrong, huh?
Well, he checked everybody's, to make sure that they were correct.
Well, we've had Dr. Greg Forbes on before, and he told some stories, and of course J.B. Elliott, one of our fabulous legacy panelists, got to meet him at the Weather Service in Birmingham after the Smithfield tornado, and has some really great stories about meeting him. Of course, he lived in Japan at a pivotal time in history. Did he ever talk about that time before he came to the United States, or the cultural things that he may have run into when he came to the U.S., Brian?
No, he never really talked about that too much. He talked about, going into Nagasaki and Hiroshima afterwards. And, it's a fascinating story about that, which was actually told there was a PBS special on the American Experience, and they feature him. But a lot of people thought that there was more than one explosive device that did the bomb or created the damage in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So he went on the ground, and he knew about radioactivity, and knew that, because he was a physicist, really. And he had a unique way of determining where the bomb detonated. In the cemeteries around Hiroshima and Nagasaki, they have flower pots that are made out of bamboo. And he noticed these burn marks, and these burn marks were at an angle. Okay, they were created by the fireball or the radiation fireball, whatever. And so he triangulated where those all met from the different cemeteries and came up with the height of where the bomb must have been detonated, which was like 810 meters above ground. And he was, surprisingly close to what the real detonation point was, which I think was around 820 meters, something like that. So it was quite fascinating to know that sort of thing. But he never talked about anything else to do during the war. He talked about him traveling here. And Horace Byers was the person who invited him to come to the United States after Horace Byers found had a paper of Fujita's that he did on thunderstorm analysis and mesoscale analysis of a thunderstorm event. And so Fujita was invited by Horace Byers to come to the University of Chicago, and the rest was history. So he stayed here.
And one of the interesting Dr. Fujita trivia questions or answers is he was in Kokura when Nagasaki was bombed, and Kokura was the primary target for that mission, but it was obscured by clouds. So the B-29 diverted to the alternate target, which was Nagasaki.
That's correct.
Brian, you go back to rivalries like Espy and Redfield, and you think Fujita couldn't have been questioned or had any difficulties in his research. But the documentary, The American Experience, that you talk about covered, it was not always easy sledding for him. Talk about that for a moment.
Well, yeah, there was times, and some of it was before I got there. I got there in 1980, but, when he came up with the idea of multiple vortice tornadoes and suction vortices, and, Neil Ward had already demonstrated that in a laboratory anyway, but the vortex breakdown and so forth. But he came up with, that there would be multiple vortices, and people were scoffing at them, saying, "Oh, that would never occur." But then when April 3rd occurred, there was movie films, and one in particular from Xenia that showed the multiple vortices taking place in the tornado, and so proved all those other people wrong. But he had that happen several times, in his career. Coming up with the idea of a downburst was another one, which was not looked at very, very highly at some point. And eventually he would be proven correct, So it's, once we got into the 1980s, I think, there was a lot more trust with him, with things. There was certainly controversy with certain people. He would always have some friction with some other scientists. I think Ed Kessler, for a while, he had some friction with, but really, he during the 1980s really didn't need to worry about funding because he would get it.
Pretty amazing, man. Any funny stories to tell us about him?
Well, there's always some funny stories with some of it had to do with him talking, when I first, and in his language, and some people said it was hard for him to understand him, and I can understand that when you first see him. But after I was there so many years, I knew exactly what he was talking about. But I can remember being in mesometeorology class, and we had was right at the time that Voyager was going around Saturn. Okay, it was like 1980. Going around Saturn, and it had pictures of Saturn and so forth. And he would kick in a little astronomy because he liked astronomy. He said, did anybody see pictures of Saturn's rings? And I'm thinking, Saturn's rings? What the heck is a? And then I thought, oh, Saturn's rings. So, you hear about the stereo, people saying, that Japanese people or they L's and R's get mixed up. With him, it was actually true. And in fact, sometimes he would write down some of his manuscripts, and he'd have write things the way he talked. But he was, he was a great mentor of mine. So, there were times that he would, when there was grant time, you didn't want to be around him because he was just so focused and just, he would get angry. So you kind of stayed away during that time when he was trying to fill out grants, and then later on you figured out, he's going to get the money. He just worries so much about whether he's going to get it or not. But yeah, here's another good one story. People, whenever there was a tornado warning, he would gather everybody like me and Roger Wakamoto and some of the other people that worked there, and we would take the elevator to the roof. So we were on the roof trying to see if we could see the tornado or whatever. And in Chicago, it's not a great place to go storm chasing, I'll tell you that. But we'd be on the roof, and I'm thinking later on in life, I'm teaching safety, severe weather safety. And here we're doing just the opposite of what we're trying to tell people what to do.
And he wouldn't see a tornado in person until several years later, right, Brian?
Yeah, that was during the Joint Airport Weather Studies, or JAWS project, out in Denver, Boulder area in 1982. And he saw, it was a land spout, and he saw it at a distance. Okay. But he was excited about that. And I wasn't there at the time. I actually came the next day and missed the tornado event. Drove into Denver when there was a hailstorm. And then he was recovering from a little hangover from
his
celebration of seeing his tornado.
Well,
and then he had me and Roger Wakamoto and a couple other people go out and try to find the track of the thing. And it was in the middle of a wheat field and near, and it is, it's like, we couldn't find the damn thing. And we're going around. We finally found a horse trough. There was a trough that was in the middle of the field that had landed there for some reason. But he called it F3. And to this day, I think that was the most overrated F3 in existence, because he didn't want to have some piddly little F1 or F0 to be his legacy for seeing his first tornado. His license plate actually read TF0000, which meant zero tornadoes. And he was contemplating changing that, but he never did. He just left it at 0.
That's funny. Then, of course, he's famous for for being a big contributor to the scale that bears his name to this day. Talk about some stories around that, Brian, if you have any.
Well, he was very proud of the F scale. He came up with that in 71, and it was mainly after the Lubbock tornado in 70 that he came up with that. And he would always have these arguments with the engineers, and because the engineers thought that that the wind speeds should be lower, okay, because for the higher F scale ratings, so from F3 to F5, the wind speeds were too high. But Fujita, God, he was adamant that he was right, and he'd get that way. A little bit later on in the 80s, then he kind of changed a little bit, and then he decided, well, maybe depends on how the home is built and so forth. And so he kind of adjusted things a bit. So he started understanding that, probably a home would get destroyed at lower wind speeds than 300 or totally destroyed. So he was just starting on that, going into that direction. And that's when I left, not too long after that. But
yeah, he was an amazing person for sure. So how did working with him influence your professional career, Brian?
Well, I always like severe weather, tornadoes, obviously, but I certainly learned a lot about photography with him and tornadoes. And one thing people don't realize that he had quite a photo lab up in where he was at there. He had dark rooms. We would make our own manuscripts, photo ready, screen photos and that sort of thing, ready for publication, publication ready stuff. But so I got interested in photography, learned a lot about photography, but then I was interested in moving on, because I had been with him for so many years and done a lot of surveys with him and so forth. And I was getting married in 1988, and so I thought, I'm not going to make that much money when I'm getting married and living in Chicago area, being a researcher under him. So that's when I went in the Weather Service. So I put my application in. And what's funny, I said, Dr. Fujita, I'm putting in my application to the Weather Service. He says, how much notice do you want me to give? And he says, yeah, a year. I said, and then he turned around. He said, no, a month or something like that. So he was kind of joking about that. But,
Brian, it's good to have you on. I'm just sitting here staring in awe at what it must feel like to be a retired WCM. So you look very happy and relaxed and able to enjoy thunderstorms now and all kinds of good stuff. So, we can talk more about that. Before we move off of Fujita, this is just kind of a speculative question. I asked this on a webinar. I can't remember who the subject matter experts were, but we've had the controversy about the EF scale and about estimating tornado wind speeds based on remote sensing, like mesonet stations or mobile radar. You knew Dr. Fujita. Where do you think he would come down on the idea of using mobile radar data to estimate the intensity of a tornado?
Well, that's a good question. He might have welcomed some of it. I'm sure. I know when Howie measured like 320 miles an hour on one tornado. I don't think it was Red Rock or something like that. Back in 91, I know Fujita was happy because it proved to him that the wind speeds can't get that high in a tornado. So I think he would have welcomed the remote sensing part of it. It's hard to say. But the Weather Service, the EF scale started. I was approached back in 2000. And this is 2 years after Ted died. Okay. And they wanted to get together, Texas Tech people and other engineers wanted to get together and talk about the F scale and see if they can change that a bit. And I was kind of, well, all right. I wasn't too thrilled about it at first, but then later on realized, well, maybe we need to incorporate some of the engineering aspects and stuff for it. So I was on the steering committee for the EF scale, and along with other people like Don Burgess and Joe Schaefer was on it, and Kishore Mehta from Texas Tech, and Jim McDonald from Texas Tech, and I don't think Tim Marshall was on it just yet, but we decided to have a forum, which we did like 6 months later in Dallas, that got people together, different meteorologists, and to come up with maybe a solution on what to do, and changing the scale, maybe lowering those wind speeds from F3 to F5, and so the idea was, what are we going to call this scale? And it was actually Roger Wakamoto that came up with the idea. Well, let's call it enhanced Fujita scale. That way we can still say F, okay? It's the F scale, but it's enhanced Fujita scale. Well, now we call it EF, just because to compare it with, so it's different than the legacy scale, but still we came up with that. And then Greg Forbes sent out some forms to different meteorologists and engineers, and it was basically the way the wind speeds and the different damage indicators and degrees of damage were figured out was through expert elicitation. It was all done through expert elicitation. Now, that's probably not the best way to do it, but that's the way it ended up. But now I'm involved with the American Society of Civil Engineers committee. We're doing a standard for tornado wind speeds. And so that covers everything. That covers radar, both radar from 88D and Dow measurements and so forth. Covers in situ measurements. Tornado hits a mesonet station or something like that. Remote sensing. So it's covered, and EF scale. EF scale is a big part of it. And so, and Tim Marshall's heading up the committee for the EF scale. And well, he's one of them. He's not really heading it up, actually. Is another person that's heading it up. But so we're altering the EF scale again. A little more engineering data now. We're combining things like, why do we have single wide mobile homes and double wide mobile homes? It really doesn't matter that much to put them together. Separating out single family or housing to where you have wood frame construction versus concrete construction, like you see, concrete block construction like you see down in Florida or someplace like that. And we're adding some new damage indicators. So we're adding like center pivot irrigation systems like we see all over Nebraska here. And we have grain bins, legacy religious buildings, modern religious buildings. So that's going to change here. So that should come out sometime, looks like in 2026 will be published.
And that's exciting, Brian. The center pivot irrigation rigs, the sheds, the vehicles are
vehicles are included too.
That's going to be huge. So you talked about the enhanced Fujita scale, and I guess this was an add-on even after that. But at some point, the Weather Service, for the longest time, if we did a survey or there was a tornado and there was no damage whatsoever, we just couldn't find any. All those tornadoes got logged as an EF0 or an EF0 in the EF scale era. Right. At some point, though, we came up with the unknown category, which always it's a big laugh at spotter training when I say you people, I beg your pardon, but no. But that was more recent, right? I can't remember when that came into being. It's just in the last few years, I think.
That was in the last few years that we came up with EFU. And so that was just recently. So and it makes sense, if a tornado is in the middle of nowhere, western Kansas, and there's no damage, you don't know what to rate it. And you have to remember that the scale is a damage scale. So if you don't know what it is, just say unknown. I know that probably doesn't please people like Tom Grazoulis, who does tornado statistics, but he mainly looks at F2 and greater stuff anyway. So, in fact, I talked to Tom just the other day, so about the F scale and so forth. So, the EFU is relatively new. I don't know if everybody is using it religiously, though, because I still see people putting in EF0 things where there's no damage.
Yeah, there are some that don't like it, don't appreciate it, but I think it's a lot more accurate than assigning a wind speed to something when you don't know. But anyway, appreciate that.
Brian, I remember the scale early on in my middle school days, learning about it and reading Weatherwise magazine, and it was the Fujita Pearson scale. Did you get to spend much time with Alan Pearson along the way?
I'd see him when I worked in Kansas City. Once in a while, he'd stop in the office. And here's an interesting, kind of a funny story. Not so funny for Al. He was going to give a talk to the AMS chapter down in Kansas City, and so he had all his slides in his tray, and he was going to get them all set, and he put them on the slide projector, and the carousel was jammed and it wouldn't work. So he picks up the carousel and starting to look at it, and he unscrews the top of the thing. And then he turned the slide tray over, and all of his slides tumbled to the floor. So then he was scrambling to put the slides back in. And then when he started giving his program, we were watching it, and then once in a while there'd be a slide that's sideways. But the Pearson scale, Ted didn't say too much about that. I think he would, in some respects, he didn't like the fact that Alan wanted to have that on there. But yeah, you don't hear much about that anymore. The Pearson scales, path width and path length.
Right.
So the FPP scale. So, which he included on April 3rd map. You see it's FPP. But the PP part has kind of faded away.
Mm-hmm. Jeremy, you're up.
That I am. I had to get the unmute button there. Brian, this has been great hearing all the stories. I've heard quite a few of these, obviously, over the years. So, thinking back on your career and thinking about having your time with Dr. Fujita as your mentor, is there one particular lesson or thing that you took from him that you consider the most valuable?
Well, that's a good question. I would think the one thing is I've become more of a perfectionist about things. Be very careful if I do a figure or if I do some sort of, even when I did it for work, graphics, does this graphic look right? So I think that's the one thing that, is make sure it's right, and make sure it's not what Fujita would say is just spaghetti up there. That's what he would say. That's just spaghetti, just because it was, there was a lot of graphics that people weren't adept like him, back then. So, but that's the one thing is, make sure that your graphics can tell a story and tell it, and people can figure it out right away.
Roy, I think you're finally up. I think we stalled here for about 25 minutes to get to your question.
Well, Brian, thank you for being with us tonight. This has really been a treat. And you bring back a memory, because I think it's only James Spann and I that will remember this. And I sent James a text a few minutes ago about those. I think it was, Brian, those Friday, Saturday meetings at the National Severe Storm Forecast Center in the late winter, early spring, when broadcasters used to come to Kansas City for that conference. Fred Osby and my friend Bob Johns and other people that I remember. And those sessions were so important, James. I mean, I remember that's one of the first times I met you, I think, James Spann. And in one of those meetings and AMS meetings, really brought back memories. And I so much enjoyed our meetings at the Federal Building back in those days.
Those were the glory days. Goodness gracious. Yeah. You'd walk in there and all of these heroes of the weather enterprise were in that old Federal Building in Kansas City, and you got a chance to meet them, and they were so nice, and they talked with you. And, we were kind of young back then. And despite the fact that we were young, they took the time to spend with us. And walking in that communications room, all those teletypes clacking, man, that was sexy. Oh, man, goodness gracious. It was awesome. But yeah, this was back in the early 80s. So this was, it's going back 40 years, Troy. It was good.
Yeah. And Brian, there was just so much, I so much look forward to that every year when we did that.
Yeah.
A number of years. Yeah.
Well, I enjoyed my time in Kansas City, and when they said they were going to move to Norman, nothing against Norman, our hearts sunk because we had such a tight core of people, and it is like, we want to move us all that way, and so we had such a great camaraderie, all the lead forecasters, Larry Wilson and Bob Johns and Rich Anthony. Who else was there? Jack Hales, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And Steve Weiss, well, all great mentors there too. Great people. Bob was great when there was a watch. If there was, he made sure that watch got out ahead of time. And maybe I shouldn't be critical of the way things are now with watches, but it seems like you don't have the lead time like you did back then. And but Bob was always great at that, and he used to have fun with him too. He was always trying to do some weird snack all the time, or trying to weird diet or something like that. One time he was on a midnight shift and he was eating raw turkey franks during. It's like
what?
Oh.
That's
Wow.
Bob. And Bob also,
Wow.
Brian, it came a little later in his career after his retirement when he was living out east of Norman that I think he may have seen his first tornado when it almost hit his house out there. That was after he'd retired, I think. Maybe he was still at at the Storm Prediction Center.
Yeah, his interest in severe weather actually was from Palm Sunday.
Yeah,
65, because he actually took us to his hometown of Terhune, Indiana, and saw he drove us where the track of the tornado one of the tornadoes took place there. That was during the Indianapolis Severe Storm Conference, but he was a great guy. It's too bad that he's gone, not with us anymore.
Hey, Brian, I've just got a trivial question out of all this. When National Severe Storms Forecast Center moved to Norman, how many people moved and how many just didn't move at all to go down there?
Now, that's a good question. Not too long after that occurred, there was a mass exodus in 1994. And it had to do with the fact that was also the time that the modernization of the National Weather Service took place. And so there was a lot of these lucrative jobs out there. These SUS and WCM jobs are out there. I know my wife wasn't too keen about moving to Norman. And she wanted to stay within shot of Chicago to visit, have the kids visit the grandparents in Chicago area, and a driving distance. And so I started looking around at the WCM and SU jobs. So got the Omaha job. So, but anyway, that occurred. There was a mass exodus of a lot of people that went into either a SU or WCM job. I know Rich Anthony left and became an MIC at Wilmington, North Carolina. And but some of them stayed on, and they Jim Henderson, who was the deputy director at the time, actually wanted me to stay on because and some respects I wish I had done it, but I had a great career after that too. So
this is another weird question. When was smoking outlawed or banned in offices? Because I imagine, you see all these pictures from back in the 60s, short sleeve dress shirts, crew cut, cigarette, skinny tie. It was the uniform.
Well, yeah, they had, when I got there in Kansas City, they decided to have a smoking room. So they actually had a room. It wasn't well ventilated, I'll tell you.
Oh.
They had a room where people could smoke. And so the smokers, and there were a few of them, there was a lot of smokers in the Weather Service at one time, a lot of ex-military people, lot more ex-military people back in that day than there was today. So they had a smoking room, but when you walked in that room, it was like a cloud of smoke that would hit you, Kind of reminded me of riding the commuter trains in Chicago and walking through a smoking car. They used to have smoking cars. You'd walk into there and it was this big white cloud of smoke. It's like, how can you even breathe?
And that's how wildfire forecasting got under their purview, right?
It's like walking past that room in the Atlanta airport. I don't know if they still have them or not, but there'll be like 40 people in there puffing away with about visibility down to about a quarter mile.
Just walk by and get a contact high, keep moving.
So that's crazy. Now, one of our other great listeners, in addition to Jeremy, Jay Farlow, said you'd done a lot of research recently on the history of the Skywarn program. Brian, share some of that with us, because we're obviously big fans and would love to hear some of the history you found.
Well, gee, that was quite a while ago I did that, but I can't remember who it was that started Skywarn, but it goes back a long ways, even in the 1950s. And there's quite a humorous video out there. The Weather Bureau at that time had on storm spotting, and there's the guy who's in a house with his wife, and they're a tornado, and it was like watching a soap opera, with the all of a sudden he sees the tornado and the organ plays, and he gets on the telephone and he's calling the Weather Bureau, and he says there's a tornado, so and so, I see it over there. And then you hear him say, yes, it's touching the ground. And he's like getting mad, like like the forecaster on the other end is saying, well, is it really a tornado? Or so it's kind of amusing little film movie. You can find it, I think, on YouTube, but it's but it goes back to the 50s, going into the 70s. And of course, amateur radio played a big role with Skywarn, going into the 70s, and now amateur radio is, and I don't know, Rick, and he probably can attest to this too. It's still used, but the other means of getting information now through social media is really taken off from the usage of amateur radio is not as great as it was back when I started as a WCM, for sure.
And some of us are debating whether that was actually a good thing or not at this point, Brian, but obviously it is effective, and for sure.
Well, the one thing I tried to, I had a lot of young meteorologists that say, why do we need amateur radio? It's old and antiquated, and it's like, well, if everything else breaks down,
yep.
you can still get through on ham radio, and they just don't realize that.
Talk about some of the biggest events you worked while you were at SELS, Brian.
Well, let's see. The busiest night was in Bob John's. No, it wasn't Bob John's. It was Rich Anthony. It was the evening shift. It was 1991, April 26, 1991. The Andover, Red Rock, Cowley County tornado, tornadoes, all of those that night. That was the busiest night ever during that night. And we were impressed with the Wichita office that was sending out, as the tornado was going through parts of Wichita and Andover, was sending out these quick severe weather messages telling exactly where the tornado was at different points. And just very useful information was being sent across that night, but it was very busy that night. Let's see, there was the March 13th, 1990, that was Heston. I put out the initial convective outlook for that day. Had a little discussion, I wouldn't say argument, but a discussion with the lead forecaster, because I wanted to go high risk. And I ended up going moderate. It really was a high risk when you think of the verification afterwards. But it was because that he said, well, the dew points are going to get up to 65, okay? And because he didn't have 65-degree dew points forecast, he didn't think the tornadoes would have a big outbreak. Well, it certainly did. So that was another big event. And my baptism on fire was, I think, in 1980, is it 88? November of 1988. That was Alabama. There was an outbreak down in the southeast. Huntsville got hit.
Mm-hmm.
November 15th, 89.
Oh, November 15th, 89. So it was 89. Okay. So that was a very busy day. Very busy day. And then I was there during the Plainfield tornado in 1990, I believe it was 1990. Yeah. That, and there was a severe thunderstorm watch issued for that, and there was a little controversy about that. Should it have been a tornado watch or should it have been a severe thunderstorm watch? Well, we were just starting to really talk about CAPE and shear, okay, back then. And I can still remember a lecture in Kansas City where we had John Davies come in, great storm chaser, talk about shear and CAPE, and in cells at the time, we didn't use CAPE all that much. We used lifted index all the time, So that was fascinating. We're just starting to learn that sort of thing, and the one thing I think that's, I'm changing the subject here, but one thing that I've noticed over the years is that some of the mystery out of forecasting and severe weather it's not as mysterious in some respects. Some cases it is, but some, here we're seeing these models generating things, and we're able to see that, what's going to happen compared to years ago where you huddled over the fax machine. When I was a student at NIU, we'd huddle over the fax machine waiting for the LFM output to come out to see what would happen with the next storm system. So, some of that mystery has gone away a little bit. And I don't know if you've noticed that, all of you noticed that over the years. But that's what kind of got me interested in weather too, is, you're trying to figure out the pieces of the puzzle and put it together.
Yeah, I don't think if you go back and look at that synoptic analysis, the famous the famous booklet that was put out after the super outbreak, I don't think CAPE or instability is mentioned one time, if I recall, because I think Joe Golden sent me that book after that event, and I treasure that. But it was all about lifted index, and that's what I just wanted to know as much as I could, but it was about that and pattern recognition more than specific parameters.
Oh,
Were there
yeah.
computational limits on why we couldn't use CAPE? I mean, LI is much. I mean, you can just do LI in your head real quick. I'm just wondering if computing power was not strong enough to generate CAPE fast enough to. I don't know.
No, I don't think it was at the time. I think we didn't understand it all that well right at the time. They were calculating the area under the positive area and so forth. And I can remember at Cells, we were all excited when we got a 486 computer. That was a big deal. It was going to be fast. That was you could replace our 386s with the 486. So I think that was it. And the understanding of the balance and of shear and CAPE was not well understood at that time. We understood shear in some respects, but not to the degree we know it today.
Yeah. So take us into, we really haven't talked about your time in the Omaha Valley office. Brian, I know Jen's got a bunch of questions that some of our listeners over on her Discord server have wanted to ask. So talk about that move to the WCM role, how it's evolving, how it's evolved over the years, and some of your most poignant memories from the office.
Well, yeah, I got there in '94, July of '94, and it was after the 88D we had just started getting the 88D, and at that time we had the PUP, which to look at the radar data, because you couldn't look at on AWIPS. AWIPS wasn't around then. And we had AFOS in the office. I thought it was a big letdown when I went from NSFCC looking at satellite data using our CSIS system, which was Mercatus-based systems, looking at satellite data, and then coming to the office in WFO, and the satellite data was nowhere near the resolution and good as it was in Kansas City. But the WCM role back then, it was evolving. I was in WCM training class number 1, the first one. Bill Bunting was in that class too with me too, so that was interesting to know. But that time it was kind of an extension of the old WPM warning preparedness meteorologist that some offices had. Not every office had one. But it's kind of an extension of that, where you dealt with kind of verification. You did your public outreach. That's always been there, and interacting with emergency management always was there. But it was mainly the WCM that did that interaction with emergency management. It wasn't the rest of the office, unless the office got a phone call from the emergency manager. Is mainly we were the liaisons for emergency management, and back at that time is right when we were the big thing was EAS, Emergency Alert System. Just starting to talk about, send out the warnings with the infamous tones, that go out, the EAS tones that go out. So people joke because I can do a good imitation of the tones, but
well, then we might have to hear it.
All right. Yeah.
Unless we set off something, James. If it's really, really good, it might set off the receivers all over Alabama.
Yeah, it's actually illegal to put on television. So we are on television, so we can't do it.
We better not. We better not.
Better not.
We will be
Doggone it.
fined by the FCC $50,000, and we'll have to fork it up here. So no.
We'll just take it out of your salary, James. No
Oh,
problem.
yeah, right.
The
Yeah,
old
the big
WeatherBrains
WeatherBrains salary.
Yeah. Jen, I know you got lots of great questions over there. Pick out some of the best ones for Brian from the Tornado Talk folks.
Yeah, Brian, it's so great to talk to you. It's been, I interviewed you 7 years ago when Tornado Talk was a podcast. And we talked about the Wayne, Nebraska 2013, October 4th, Wayne, Nebraska tornado. And so I threw it in our server. I'm like, okay, Brian's on tonight. What do you want to ask him? And all these people threw tornadoes at me all of a sudden. They brought up Pilger, Hallam, Coleridge. So looking back at some of the tornadoes that you surveyed or had to forecast for during your time at National Weather Service Omaha, talk about some of the big ones and just what you remember from those. Were some of the unique parts of those events?
Well, I've done a lot of them. And I would be sent out. I was one of the few people that would be sent out to go survey some of these big events too, nationally. And so Spencer, South Dakota was one I went and did. It's a very close one, but Andover was one of the first ones, and hurricane surveys as well. But gee, I think the one thing I remember is the Hallam storm. We were warning for that. It was busy night. And we heard from the emergency manager that the town was destroyed, totally destroyed. Now, and Rick could probably attest to that you've heard that about things, or buildings are destroyed, and then you go in and you see a roof that's off of a house or off of a building or something like that. And sure, it's destroyed in a way, but to me, destroyed is leveled. So I'm driving down there with another person down there. And we're driving up to Hallam, and I'm thinking in my mind, well, we'll see how bad this is. You'll see how bad it is. So we go over a hill, and we're driving into Hallam, and I first look at it, and I from a distance, and I say, oh my, we're going to be here a while. It was kind of a shock to me how bad it looked. And thinking, is this right? Is this thing really this wide? Is it, is this? And then you see some of the video from it, especially down in not Jefferson County, but next to Jefferson County. It was Jefferson and Gage County, and Saline County. It was near Wilbur, and you can actually see the tornado just get wide in the video that was shot just east of Wilbur, Nebraska. And it's like, well, probably is that wide. And then it makes you think, well, gee, where does the mesocyclone start and where does the tornado start? Is this really a mesocyclone on the ground? And so anyway, it was that was one of the most memorable ones. Of course, Pilger was another really big event. That was really intense. And then recently going to see help with the Mayfield, Kentucky tornado event. There were some things there. I think Fujita, if he just flew over it, would say it was it would have been a 5, but the construction was pretty substandard. So that's why it was lowered, but not to a 4. Which brings the question that I had with Tom Grzoulis the other day is, will we ever have another 5? No. Are they really limited now? We now look at these things, the construction, so closely now that they're not going to be many 5s. So those are the 2 memorable events. Andover was when I was in Kansas City and you got to do the aerial survey there. That was rated a 5. And that's when I conferred with Tim Marshall on that. Just before the tornado hit the mobile home park, Golden Spur Mobile Home Park, it had gone through and leveled a subdivision. And gee, it looked like an EF5 or a 5 from the air, just because the way the debris was blown way downstream and there was just slabs left. So I called Tim and I said, Tim, this looks like a 5. What, did you go in that area? And he said, yeah. And he said the studs were chewed up in 1 to 2 foot sections. And he said he had no hesitation that it could be called a 5. So we called it a 5. That was a memorable event. But in some respects, I hate going on, and I don't know if Rick can echo this or not, because he's gone through a lot of damage. But sometimes you feel a little uneasy when you're walking through, looking at storm damage on the ground, because you feel like you shouldn't be there. You're just imposing yourself with these people that have been devastated by a tornado. Well, while on the air, you don't feel that same sense, because you're concentrating so much and mapping out that tornado track and photographing it that you don't really sense of what's happened on the ground. Kind of similar like to, let's say, a bombardier bombing in World War II, bombing a target, doesn't see the real horror that's happened on the ground, where when you walk through it, you really do see that. What's interesting is when you go talk to people, they open up and they start telling you stories, talk about the event, and it's part of their grieving process. Part of the grieving process is to tell you what went on. So never had any problem going through an area where they felt you were intruding or whatever.
I can only imagine. Rick, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I agree 100%. I mean, that's being there, walking around and seeing it's real life at that point. You're seeing what was in these people's kitchen cabinets and, their children's toys. And it's one of the hardest parts of the job, but it's in a way it can be one of the most rewarding, because like you said, people love to talk to the point where sometimes it's hard to get the actual physical tornado survey done, because they want to talk in some of the stories, and just knowing that you are helping them, like you said, kind of in the grieving process or the processing of what had happened, that makes it kind of it's good and bad at the same time. But yeah, I share your feelings about that 100%.
The one thing that we were asking about was the way that things change too in our job, and then I'm saying that with Rick here being here, is that there's a more emphasis office-wide with decision support and supporting emergency management and other agencies, the government agencies, so than there ever was before. And so really that's our bread and butter now, is doing that sort of stuff. So it isn't just the WCM that alone is making these connections. It's that whole office concept of doing that.
I have two more quick questions from the Tornado Talk team here in the server. First of all, thinking back to any of the surveys that you've done, what's some of the most unique or unusual damage that you saw?
Interesting. I could talk a lot about the different ones I saw, but two stand out, and they both occurred when I was with Fujita, and that was in 1987. One was the Teton Wilderness event, Teton Wilderness tornado. And, thousands of lodgepole pine trees. And, basically it was kind of another type of mesocyclone on the ground, but right in the middle is this tornado track, narrow track in there. And seeing lodgepole pine trees in a perfect circle where the tornado spun up was quite unusual. Never seen anything like that before. And the other one was the same year, was in Edmonton, Canada. I think the largest object I ever seen airborne was in Edmonton, and that was a 77-foot wide oil tank that it was empty, but it became airborne. Still a very heavy object, became airborne and flipped over. And so I took a picture with a person in the reference of shot of the oil tank. And you can see the numbers are upside down on the tank because it had flipped over. So that's the biggest object I've ever seen become airborne in a tornado.
All right, last question. This is a very unique question. How do surveyors determine if debris was the primary cause of structural failure?
Good question. That, we don't really take into account so much the debris loading effect. Some ways we should probably, and in a way, when we're doing the EF scale rating, we're kind of looking at the damage and how the building is constructed. But that's something we've talked about. Is debris loaded tornadoes and maybe tempering down the rating a little bit, the wind speeds a little bit, because of the fact that you've had premature failure, maybe to the structure due to debris loading. So that's something we don't really do that much, though, and maybe we should, especially in an urban environment where there's a lot of debris. I don't know, Rick, what have you?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we have Jim Ledoux in our building who helps with surveys. He definitely looks at that a lot when he's out surveying and takes that into account. I'm learning a lot from him about that. I've never really paid as much of attention to that as like you said. Maybe we should be doing that more. But yeah, sometimes you just don't know. It's sometimes you can suppose that, well, this mobile home's not supposed to be in the middle of this house. So, but what happened first? Did the mobile home hit the house? And then, it's like CSI detective work out there. And sometimes you just don't know the answer.
Yeah. And Fujita used to tell me that you're like a detective, that tornadoes are criminal and they leave their fingerprints behind. And especially when you do an aerial survey, you see their fingerprints, cycloidal marks and other debris patterns.
I've got another weird survey question. Is there any way to differentiate between the damage that a fast-moving tornado with a specific strength can do versus a very slow-moving tornado where those winds are acting on a building for a much longer period of time?
This goes back to Gerald, Texas. that event. It was slow moving, where there's a large resonance time for that. And it's the standard for ASCE is assuming a 3-second wind at 10 meters. Okay. So most structures aren't necessarily at 10 meters because it's 33 feet. It's anemometer height, so that's, but yeah, we don't take into account sometimes the resonance time that takes place. I think they did somewhat in Gerald when that took place, but still was rated a 5, I think, wasn't that Gerald? It was rated a 5. But there's a fast moving tornado. You can tell somewhat from the air because a lot of the debris is blown in one direction. You don't see the return flow as well. You might see the convergence and so forth, and the collection of the debris on the right hand side, but you don't see much return flow because it's moving so fast. So that's one way you can tell from the air. It's harder on the ground. Some things are harder to tell on the ground, especially things like that, than from the air.
So Brian, we share 2 interests: weather, obviously, and model railroading. So I want to hear, do you have a layout of your own? Do you work in a local model railroading club? How do you get involved in that hobby?
Well, it goes way back to when I was a kid, and I got a Lionel train set from my aunt. And I played with that, and then I just put it away, and then she died back right around 1990 or so. And she gave to me, or her husband gave to me a Lionel set that had not been opened from 1957. And gave it to me. Well,
that's awesome.
I'm not a collector, so I opened it up and
of course
wanted to run it. So that started me going to train shows and going to fixing up some of the old equipment. So I've got a 17 by 10 layout, O-gauge layout in the basement. So I have that hobby, and then building model aircraft and ships and things like that. So.
Well, that is so cool. Well, I hope you'll send me some pictures or videos of your layout. I'm just about to do my first one here over the next couple of years. So I would love to see what you've done. Do you get into the Amtrak? I know the train that goes to California, whose name escapes me right this
California
second.
Zephyr.
The Zephyr goes right through Omaha and Lincoln. So have you ridden the Amtrak very much?
No, in fact, I've never ridden the Amtrak.
Now you'll have more time to do that.
and most of my railroading things that I have in my layout are Chicago Northwestern, because that's what I grew up with. My house, when I grew up, right behind my house was the main line for the Chicago Northwestern. We'd go behind the backyard fence and go and wave to the conductor as a kid or whatever, or the engineers and so forth. But so that's what most of my layout is.
Awesome. Well, we're going to take a quick break here, Brian. And again, I have a few questions, but we're going to hold it because of time. So we're going to take a break, and we're going to hear from Tony Rice in his astronomy report. We're going to hear from Jen this week in tornado history. We'll come back with the email inbox. We'll do the weather roundup, picks of the week, and much more as WeatherBrains rolls along.
Looking beyond the atmosphere, here's Tony Rice with your astronomy outlook.
You may have heard about a recently discovered city-sized devil comet. You might have even heard that it's either zooming towards Earth or even threatening it. Comet 12P Pons-Brooks is a Halley-type comet, which means that it is a periodic comet, or one that we see about every 20 to 200 years. In 12P's case, it passes through about every 70 years. Records of observations of Comet 12P go back to at least the 12th century, but the discovery is credited to French astronomer Jean-Louis Pons in 1812. American astronomer William Robert Brooks also observed it in 1883. Comet 12P is notable because it's amongst the brightest comets that we know the orbital period of. It also may be the source of the Kappa Draconids, a weak meteor shower that's active in early December. This comet has generated some interest because of recent images that show dust and ice streaming from the sides, giving it a horn-like appearance. This happens as it draws closer to the sun, which heats up the surface, causing ice and dust to be ejected. That's the same thing that creates the comet's tail. Now, I double-checked with NASA's Center for Near-Earth Object Studies, but I initially had trouble finding it in the Close Approach database. That's because it's not there. I did find it in the much larger Small Body database. It's not in the Close Approach database because, despite the tabloid hype, it isn't coming anywhere near Earth. Comet 12P poses no threat. It's currently 260 million miles away. In the coming months, it will pass through the ecliptic, the plane of the solar system, between the orbits of Venus and Earth. But Earth will be on the other side of the sun at the time, 144 million miles away. Even the more reputable, non-tabloid, non-YouTube news sources have been hyping this comet a bit as being possibly naked-eye visible. I suppose anything's possible, but barring an outburst of dust and gas which would significantly increase its brightness, I wouldn't count on that. It's forecasted to reach magnitude 5. That's the extreme outer range of naked eye visibility that also requires really, really dark skies that most of us don't have access to. But there's an astronomical event coming up just before the comet reaches perihelion, or its closest point to the sun, that could provide those dark skies to a good portion of the country, if just for a couple of minutes. 12P will be about 25 degrees from the moon and sun during the total solar eclipse on April 8th. And that's going to make it far more visible along that 100-mile wide path of totality, stretching from Texas to Maine. That's your astronomy outlook. Follow me at RTP Hokie for more spacey stuff like this.
This week in tornado history, November 2nd, 1997, an F3 tornado hits New Smyrna Beach, Florida. At the time, this was the strongest tornado to ever hit in Volusia County, information via the National Weather Service. Since this twister, though, there have been 2 other F3 EF3 tornadoes in the county. One occurred on February 23rd, 1998, and there was 1 fatality then. And a second occurred on February 2nd, 2007, and there were 42 injuries. This late-night tornado in 1997 had a path length of 3 miles. It hit 1 mile west of U.S. Highway 1 between Enterprise and Wayne Avenues. It moved to the east-northeast at about 50 miles per hour, damaging several homes and bringing down trees and power lines. The storm data entry states the tornado briefly lifted after passing Chisholm Elementary School and then dropped and hit New Smyrna Beach High School. The damage here was estimated in the F1 range. The tornado strengthened to an F3 as it hit the Venetian Villas subdivision and the Diamond Head condominiums. The National Weather Service survey noted that many large, well-built homes were destroyed. At the condos, high winds blew out exterior glass walls and blew furniture into the adjoining Indian River Lagoon. The tornado moved over the Intracoastal Waterway and passed over the barrier island between Robinson Road and East Street. More homes were destroyed in the stretch. The tornado dissipated over the Atlantic. A total of 31 homes were destroyed, 290 damaged. Damage was estimated at $14 million. 32 people were injured. Check out our summary about this event at tornadotalk.com.
It's that time of the program where we dive into the email inbox and just maybe there's something in there this week.
So we teased this question earlier in the show, and so I'm curious to see what ChatGPT and Bill Murray GPT say here. Thank you, James Lewis, for this very funny question. It's made me chuckle all week. If there was ever a James Spann biopic, who should play James Spann, and who should play? It gets better. Who should play the drunk man swearing at him during that game last week?
I think I have both answers. I got one actor that could play both.
Okay.
I'm recusing myself.
Says Jeff Daniels should play you, James. So I think he would probably come closer to the drunk guy, at least the Dumb and Dumber part. But I thought Kevin Costner would look good in a pair of suspenders, James. That's who I'd vote for.
There you go.
He's got too much hair. Wow.
Anybody else?
Very disturbing. Very disturbing
Yeah.
here.
Yeah. James A. Ladot, do you have anything that you'd like to add?
It's too bad that R. Lee Ermey has departed because he would be my guest, the drill sergeant.
That's awesome. Thank you, James, for that question. Thanks to everybody who writes into us. We're going to cut the email a little short tonight so we can get to the picks of the week and the weather roundup. So back to you, Span.
Yeah, so real quick on the weather roundup, it's obviously cold, and cold air is kind of settled in over much of the country. And Jen, you say you got some snow coming?
Yeah, a little snow tomorrow evening time, right, for the trick-or-treaters. So hopefully they get a little bit of an early start. I don't think it's going to be a lot, but with our temperatures falling off into the 20s tomorrow night, there could be some slick spots around. I think less than a half inch though here, but it's our first of the season. And I'm not a fan. And Cece the cat, who shows up on the show often, is now laying on the heater vent almost most of the day because she's so cold. So,
but I was going to see if anybody has any comments on the Hurricane Otis that hit Acapulco and the rapid intensification, and any thoughts on that deal. Wow. Models missed it.
Yeah,
it looked a lot stronger. Say it didn't look that strong on satellite for a long time, and then it just went bananas.
And then again, Dr. Jacobs is out this week. I think he had his kids had some Halloween parties or something he had to go to, but maybe we'll get him to comment on the situation next week. But it's interesting to me how numerical weather prediction just failed, and I guess part of it maybe is the lack of data. And he always says, garbage in, garbage out. And that's a part of the world where you don't really have a lot of reliable upper air data, and it's just you don't get the data going into the things. So, but just a fascinating,
eerily similar to Patricia.
Yeah, fascinating fail and horrible situation. In fact, we'll just kind of roll into picks of the week. In fact, that's my pick of the week. It's this piece with some really dramatic pictures, and we really didn't see a lot out of there for a day or two, but now that reporters have been in there and we've got these images, it's pretty stunning, and the damage is just horrific. And again, my pick of the week, I want to say it's from the Atlantic, but it'll be up in the website weatherbrains.com. But this is where we go around the horn and everybody shares something that is cool. A pick. It can be a website, it can be hardware, software, anything. So James A., since you got are you doing the 10 o'clock tonight?
Yep. As soon as this is over, I'll head back in the car and head up 169.
All right, well, you go, since you might have to leave early, so go.
My pick of the week is something that I played around with on Photoshop, because when the skies are sunny, Photoshop occasionally comes out when I'm at work. And I did a Snickers bar and superimposed the QG omega equation in it and said, make sure you inspect your kids' candy, because I think that somebody's been putting nefarious things in this candy bar.
No, that was awesome. That was good stuff. Great stuff. All right, Rick Smith and Norman. And by the way, we should mention Kim had a kid SOS, so she had to take out a little early tonight. But Rick Smith, give us a good pick.
Yeah, winter is here for some of us, and it will be here for all of us, whether we like it or not. So my pick is the Weather Service just had this big public webinar for winter weather, and one of the things we're changing this year is they're fine-tuning some of the heavy snow criteria for when we issue a winter storm warning or a heavy snow warning, and it's much less tied to state boundaries and geopolitical boundaries, and they've tried to make it a little bit more scientific. It's going to create a little bit of a mess in some other ways, but my pick of the week is just this nice GIS map that shows county by county what those heavy snow guidelines are for warnings.
Good stuff. All right, Rick, thank you. Troy Kimmel, give us a good pick.
Got this one's kind of interesting, but kind of, I guess, in the weeds a little bit. But I noticed this last week or so, several interesting, James, public information statements from headquarters. The one today, and I'll send you a link where you can find all these listed online. But National Weather Service at Guam, finally, and our Landon, Brandon, and all the folks at WFO Guam, they're starting to contribute more of the grid's data, I guess, in the National Digital Forecast Database. and they're still have the comment period ongoing with that. But also, I want to point out in the last couple of days, there's another statement from the Weather Service headquarters regarding an experimental NWS translation website. Find that interesting, back on the 26th. And then finally on the 25th, the day before, if you haven't followed this, folks along the Gulf Coast, the Slidell, Louisiana WSR 88D is being decommissioned. They're going to move it out to Hammond, Louisiana. So we're going to lose that radar for a while. All those are public information statements that have been released within the last week. And James, that is my pick of the week.
Outstanding. And by the way, Brian, we're stalling. We're giving you some more time to come up with a good pick here. So Jen, let's go to you. Give us a good pick.
I really enjoyed tonight, Ryan. It was so wonderful. And especially talking about the 1974 super outbreak, because that's what Tornado Talk is working on right now. We have a multi-year project to try to cover some of these events from the 1974 super outbreak. And we're only working on our first one here. It's the Frankfurt to Stamping Ground F4. We found so much information on our trips. I really feel like these are going to be some of the more detailed summaries that you're going to find, with different stories and really trying to hone in on what happened along the path and talk about areas that we really don't talk about. Or, everyone knows Guin, or they know Xenia, but what about the Frankfurts and the Richmonds and the Palmyras? What else happened that day? There were 148. We're going to try to cover at least 40. And I created a little promo video I wanted just to kind of throw out there. One other brain makes a little appearance in there too. And just to get some hype going on what we're working on. Again, it's going to be a multi-year thing, but we're really excited. We're pouring our heart and soul into these stories.
Outstanding. Excellent work. Okay, Brian, we've stalled long enough. Give us something really exciting, riveting, good. Go.
Well, since I talked a lot about damage, there's ways that you can look at the damage right online. So there's what's called the Damage Assessment Toolkit. And there's a public server that you can, or public site that you can go to look at tornado tracks of various tornadoes that have taken place and what the EF scales are at different points along that track. You can click on them, and it's at each point you get the details about what was hit. And also it'll have links to photographs of some of the damage. So that's something that you can look at. It's an ArcGIS program, and so you can look at all these different tornadoes from about 2008 up. And they won't have everything because we tested it back in 2008. And then now every office uses it. So
outstanding. All right, Jeremy, same thing. We've stalled long enough. Give us something good.
I am always ready. We've got
you were born ready.
Absolutely. Just ask around.
But he's humble.
Humble and always full of gratitude. Anyway, so the pick of the week is Blake Naftel. If you remember, a few years back, came out with the Storm Chasing Anthology documentary. He has a website, a YouTube site called Ancient Air Theater. It has a lot of old kind of historical media, multimedia, severe weather related productions up there. It is just fascinating. You definitely have to go take a look at it. Bring a lunch, probably a dinner too, because you're going to be sitting on that website for quite a while. You got programs including Xenia 1974, Wichita Falls 1979. There's even a interview with Dr. Neil Ward from 1964 is on that site. So anyone who has any interest in weather whatsoever, go check it out. It's great.
Excellent. So any social media accounts you want to plug there, Jeremy? Anything you need to plug here? Plug away.
Oh, I'll plug away. JRB Storm Photography on Facebook, of course. There's JRB Storm on Instagram, JRB Storm on Twitter, X, Degeneration X, whatever we call it nowadays. And then there's also my Flickr site as well if you want to go see high resolution pictures of all the images, including the wonderful backdrop that you see back here if you're watching live. So Flickr at JRB Storm. Otherwise, thank you as always for having me. It's been great.
It's great to have you on the show. All right, Bill Murray, give us a pick.
Yeah, James, I'm gonna pick the National Weather Service in Nashville's story about a historic snow event that occurred on this date in 1966 in Middle Tennessee. 15.5 inches of snow in November in Cookeville, Tennessee, 7.2 inches in Nashville. We even had 4 inches in Huntsville. And I think this may be my earliest recollected snowstorm because there was about a trace to an inch of snow around the Birmingham metro area. And I think that's probably the first one that I remember. So I'm going to use that as my pick. Great map there of the snow depths from Tennessee. There's some great news stories on, things like newspapers.com, from that event, because it truly was shocking and it was totally surprised, at least in Middle Tennessee, because the Weather Bureau in Nashville said that it was not going to stick. So it was their own version of Snowmageddon, James Spann.
Wow. All right. Any future shows you want to plug here, Bill?
Yeah. Tanya Segnar, the meteorologist from Slovenia, is going to join us next week. Ashley Gann will join us on the 13th. And then Greg Carbon will join us for the year review on the 21st. We'll have to start working out some of those shows. Randy Cervini is going to join us on January 15th, right in advance of his new book coming out. But great guest suggestions like the one tonight from Jeremy make my job really easy. So please keep them coming.
All right. And Brian, I guess real quick here, I got time to throw in one question. We're about the same age. In our generation in the weather enterprise, what is our greatest success for this generation, and what's our greatest failure? What's the one thing we couldn't figure out?
Boy, it's a tough question.
He always asks the hard questions.
That's why I'm here. Yes.
Our biggest success is communication, getting the word out better than the days in the 1970s, 60 word per minute teletype, and now, we're getting information out like that real fast. So the communication aspect is vastly improved.
So what's the biggest challenge that we just couldn't figure out?
Boy,
I'll give you mine down here, and everybody on the show knows what it is. Air mass thunderstorms in the summer. We've not figured it out. You come on every day in June, July, and August, 3 months, and every day the forecast says partly sunny with scattered afternoon and evening thunderstorms. Probability of precipitation is 30%. That means nothing to somebody that's got a ball game at 4:30 or somebody that's got an event at 7:00, and we've not figured it out. And I'm hoping the next generation will.
Well, yeah, and I have to agree with you. I think the biggest challenge is trying to, we're going to more probabilities now. The biggest challenge now is trying to make people understand what these probabilities mean, because people don't understand. General public doesn't understand probabilities at all. So.
This is where we need Kim on the show, because she's our social scientist here, and I think that's one thing that we have done, that weaving, taking an interdisciplinary approach where you've got physical science and social science, because they've really helped. I mean, goodness, on my watch, 2011, 252 people died in one day in my state, and the warnings were excellent. Lead times 30, 40 minutes. And we learned on that day that what we do is not enough. We don't understand human behavior. We don't understand a lot about the social sciences. And so I think that's one thing that we've done well.
There's one other thing that we haven't done too, is we're working on this, and is those different populations of different needs, different language, different languages. That's where we need to touch on, or hit on, I should say.
Yeah. Well, I hate to wrap this up here, but we got to wrap it up. This was a marvelous show. And if you are new here, we're typically on the air Monday nights at 8:00 Eastern, 7:00 Central. And you can watch us live on the WeatherBrains YouTube channel, WeatherBrains, or youtube.com/WeatherBrains. But most of you listen to the audio version of this. However you consume this, we thank you. And if you'd like to get in touch with us or ask a question, the email address, it is email@weatherbrains.com. So on behalf of the entire WeatherBrains crew, I'm James Spann. Thanks for listening. Have a great week and God bless. That was a great show, Brian and Jeremy. Thank you, guys.
Awesome. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thank you.
There's
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank
a
you.
lot of things that could have been talked about too. I didn't like.
I jokingly,
like
I jokingly said
microburst research we did and all that.
I jokingly,
touch on that.
I jokingly told Bill, it's like, yeah, this could be probably a 3-parter. Easy.
Yep.
Yeah.
You'll just have to come